Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We want to welcome you to today's event where we are looking at Africa's race to 2040, mainly focusing on the partnership for Africa vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Before you, my name is Muhumza Abdukarim. I work with Afya na Haki, an African research and training institute that advances health, human rights, and sexual reproductive health and rights. We are very much honored as Afya na Haki to be hosting you today for this official launch of the investigative documentary. Just to mention that this documentary we are launching today was worked on together with the African Institute of Investigative Journalism. And later on, the head of the institute, Solomon, will be coming in to usher us into the documentary itself. We are very humbled and much honored to you all for honoring this invitation. We are much delighted that some of you here, you've been proactively engaging in a couple of our events on this program of work, which is Advancing Regional Vaccine Manufacturing and Access in Africa program. So before you have the program for today. We are very cognizant that our dignitaries here have a couple of other engagements, so we'll try to work within the available time that we have today. So we will skip the introductions bit, but we know that you are interacting and you'll get to know each other along the way. So later on, we will be listening in to our Board of Trustees Chair, Professor Ben Chinomujisha, who will be giving us welcome remarks. And then we'll have a few remarks from the National Drug Authority. The Secretary to the authority is represented fully here by Dr. Dennis Mwesigwa. We are much honored to have you here, who is the Director for Inspection at the National Drug Authority. And then we are much honored also to have Professor Potieno Kalebu, the Director for Uganda Virus Institute, who also give us few remarks at the opening. We'll hear from the National Planning Authority. They will give us a few remarks. The National Planning Authority is represented by Dr. Ivan Lule. And then that will usher us into the officiation of the documentary. Mr. Solomon Serwanja will lead us into that. And we are much honored to have Dr. Maurice Seru, who will lead us into unveiling this documentary. And then we'll have a brief panel of discussion where we'll hear different perspectives from the different stakeholders that will be sharing their views, their opinions, whether really Africa is chasing the goals for 2040 in terms of ensuring that we have vaccines for Africa, looking at the research and development and the manufacturing component, and then later we'll be closing our ceremony. On that point, I want to briefly tell you about Afya na Haki, because as we were interacting with some of our dignitaries here, they were asking me, what is Afya na Haki? Because we have roots where from, and I think a couple of us here have known us for those roots. So briefly, to tell you about Afya na Haki, like I said, we are a research and training institute that advances health, human rights, and SRHR. And we mainly use Afrocentric approaches to generate evidence, but also to undertake advocacy capacity enhancement, mainly in areas of health, human rights, and SRHR. We are indigenous based here in Uganda, but our work is regional in focus. Partly this program of work is based in Uganda. We are working with partners in Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, and Zimbabwe, specifically for this program, but we have more partners we are working with in the region. So when we say Afrocentric approaches, what do we mean? Our work is focused around 4 pillars of work. One is around positive African narratives, where we want to understand our own continent, looking at our own problems, using our own solutions to solve our own problems as Africans, and mainly by engaging Africans themselves. But also our second pillar of work is hinged on the African organizations and institutions, where we are looking at the likes of the African Union, African Commission, and also working with the relevant government ministries and departments to ensure that we advance health, human rights, and SRHR across the continent. We are very cognizant about capacities of African institutions, where we work with different alliances, coalitions, and networks, and indigenous CSOs. I want to emphasize that our work is looking at African-based indigenous organizations. And then the last bit of work is looking at how do you work with the African individuals and experts, the likes of the Dr. Sebisubi here, who have been in the field of pharmacy, the likes of Professor Kalebu. How do we tap into the expertise and the knowledge in terms of advancing our work as a continent? Mainly our work is through 4 areas where we look at advocacy capacity enhancement, we look at regionalism, partnerships and communications, but also a critical element on evidence generation. Currently, our thematic areas of work are focused on sexual reproductive health and rights, and we are looking at the determinants of SRHR. We look at governance of complex health emergencies, the likes of COVID-19, and partly to the work we are looking at here is feeding into that. We also look at health trade, economics, and human rights, which feeds into this program of work, but also health technologies. We know that health technologies currently is very critical in terms of informing digital health, telemedicine, and other components. So that's where our work is hinged from. So we are very much humbled to be hosting you here today. And like we said, we worked with the African Institute for Investigative Journalism to work on this documentary that is looking at the various perspectives of African experts, technocrats, individuals, and various stakeholders to see how do we achieve the targets for the Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing in Africa. So at this juncture, allow me, without wasting any more time, to welcome our Chairperson, Board of Trustees, Afia Nahaki, to welcome us to officially begin this event. Professor Ben, you are most welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are late, we are behind time, so I'll be as brief as possible. The Board of Trustees, I don't know why, I think Jane Nalunga, she's a member of the Board of Trustees of Haki. I don't know whether there's another. Then we have members of SEHAD, members of the board, Professor Sebisubi, Dr. Sebisubi. Now the SEHAD is the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, and is also one of the organizations which is overseen by the Board of Trustees. I think I've seen the Executive Director, ED of SEHAD, you can wave. Is the Director General of AHAC here? Okay, he's not around. So I need just to say a few remarks. My name is Ben Twinomugisha. I teach law at Makerere University, then I'm a chair of AHACI. I see the word race. Indeed, it's a race. I read in the concept that Africa, with 54 countries, with about 1.2 billion people, shamelessly produces only 1% of the vaccines in the world, and 9% are imported. And this was tested during COVID, where I think I saw Professor Kalebu and others a bit panicky, because we could not even have our own vaccine. And yet, before colonialism, our ancestors had developed a healthcare system to the extent that when the Church Missionary Society came into this country, one Dr. Ferkin and assistant found a lady who was pregnant in Bunyoro Kingdom being operated on, a cesarean section on that lady before the advent of the European on this continent. And that lady was being operated using local anesthesia, a blunt kind of knife. The lady watched The white woman watched helplessly at what was going on. A man got a knife, a blunt knife, cut the lady, removed the baby, drained the blood, using his own system, what should I say, strings or what, put the let me use what commonly use, stomach, back. The abdomen was stitched, and the anesthesia they were using was local anesthesia, tonto, the banana wine. The white man found that there was inoculation against syphilis, against smallpox during the pre-colonial times. But here we are, since 1894, when Uganda was declared a protectorate, we cannot produce a vaccine. Here we are, we privilege Western medicine, Western vaccines, as if they have to trump all type of innovation, all type of intellect within the field of development of vaccines. You know, during COVID, the politics surrounding Professor Patrick Ogwang, in terms of developing COVIDX, up to now, he hasn't received the funding he's supposed to get. These are issues we need to look at as we race towards having, I saw the dates, having 10% in 2025, 30% in 2030, and the magic 2040. Whenever I read these years in these booklets, I remember when I was a young man, the magical year 2000, health for all by 2000, education for all by 2000. Here we are, having gone through all these challenges. We are begging for vaccines from the developed West. They have invested heavily in research and development, and as it were, they must recoup their costs. Hanging over us is the trade-related aspects of intellectual property agreement of the WTO, where monopolies in terms of patents are put forward by those who have designed and manufactured these vaccines to recoup their profits after 20 years. We have the Industrial Property Act in Uganda, which allows us to exploit the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights flexibilities. How far have we gone? India, Brazil, and some countries in Latin America have made progress. But here we are, helpless as we are moving on. As I conclude, we have to thank the African Institute of Investigative Journalism, headed by Serwanja, who have come up with a film we are going to watch. They have documented developments in this area. Much as they are compressed in 30 minutes, I do believe that the message will come out. We believe at Ahaki that after watching this film, you'll be able to appreciate what has been done and ought to be done, and the challenges that lie ahead on the journey to 2025, 2030, and 2040. Thank you for listening to me, and feel comfortable.
Thank you very much, Prof, for those wonderful words. Like we said, we are running out of time. I want to welcome Professor Pochiano Kalevu to give us a few remarks from his expertise of vaccines and viruses in this country, and then we'll hear from the National Drug Authority later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for accepting change of program. I'll be stepping out briefly for another Zoom meeting, but I'll be returning because I really look forward to this, first of the documentary. I've been waiting for it for a long time. You came, Mr. Serwanja Solomon, you interviewed us. I've been watching you on TV, with other programs, but this one was not coming. And I was a little bit worried, what happened? Yeah, but thank God. When he told me you are going to really to launch it, I had to leave everything else to come and be part of it. Many of you have come, you're busy people. Thank you for coming. to this function. This investigative documentary touched on an important aspect of vaccines. And as the professor has mentioned, Africa were really behind. But many of you maybe never thought about it until the COVID outbreak, when Africa was last in getting these vaccines. But for some of us who have been thinking about this for a long time, the challenges, why aren't we having manufacturing vaccines? Why do we have limited research and development in Africa? There are many challenges, and I'm sure through the documentary and the discussions that you are going to, the panel discussions, a lot of these will come out. Because having a vaccine in the final vial as they inject into you has a lot of processes that take place before. Research and development, designing the antigens that are to be used, studies in small animals, in primates before you do phase 1 and 2 trials, and then final efficacy trials. The GMP before you go into humans, the GMP itself, we are facing it now. Yeah, we are hearing about the vaccines we're making. We are facing issues of GMP. We are facing issues of IP, intellectual property. Very, very challenging and difficult. We are realizing that. But there are other ways Africa can begin and get involved. And hence we support these efforts. They're challenging, but we support them. We can do even labeling. Simple labeling is an advancement. Helps you to learn quite a lot. The fill and finish that we talk about does help also to move the field forward in Africa. But there are many other issues that will be discussed. Funding, the capacity that we have that is limited, the market, the IP issues. And I do thank, is it Africa for really organizing this meeting and inviting us to discuss these issues. And for the documentary, I'm sure it will make a contribution towards that what we want to achieve. I want to remind you that vaccine manufacture, although we're talking about it in Africa, is not new. The first Rift Valley fever vaccine that even is used now in veterinary medicine was designed at the Uganda Virus Research Institute in the 1940s. That is called the Smith-Barn vaccine. It is an attenuated vaccine. The attenuation was done at that institute when it was still called the Yellow Fever Research Institute in the 1940s. At that time, we're under the governor and the scientists from the north. So they really left us a challenge. But even before COVID came, we had started ourselves at UVR to design another Rift Valley fever vaccine. And then COVID came in, and as you are aware, we are part of these developments. But as I welcome you and we look forward to this discussion, all the emphasis is, although the challenge is big, let's support the efforts. It may not be in our lifetime, but we cannot keep aside and watch without really getting involved. Let's tackle the challenges that we face so that our children, our grandchildren do not discuss this again. But we have the capacity in Africa to be able to design vaccines to address the challenges that we face. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope we shall have a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Prof. And like we said, one of the objectives of this meeting is really to share experiences around vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Interestingly, Professor was mentioning vaccine manufacturing in the years when I was not even thought to be born in the 1940s. So some of us are learning from you, the elders who are in this generation today. So without wasting any minute, allow me to welcome Dr. Dennis Mwesigwa, who is the Director of Inspection at the National Drug Authority. And want to thank the National Drug Authority for accepting to be part of this conversation. And he has been informing me about very many missed opportunities, and we want to take the honor to hear from you. Thank you, Doctor.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I also want to add a voice to those who have thanked the organizers for inviting the NDA for this very important occasion. But before I thank them, I must complain that as they were organizing all this, they forgot about the NDA, the main regulator of drug manufacturers in Uganda. So they invited us towards the end. So it taught me a lesson that it's not only a hacky that know about the existence of NDA, but so many Ugandans, maybe they only see when we have clips running around with these illegal drug hawkers. But the National Drug Authority is an organization that regulates medicine in Uganda, and it ensures that there is availability of essential, efficacious, and cost-effective drugs to the entire population of Uganda. Now, when we talk about drugs, we mean for those human and animals. As the others who have spoken, they have talked about vaccines related to animals. We also control those vaccines and medical devices. Recently, Cabinet approved and gave us another mandate to regulate medical devices. So as NDA, we control the whole supply chain from manufacturing of medicines. They have talked about good manufacturing practices, supply of medicines, so we control the ports, the entry of medicines. We also license the drug dealers. We do post-market surveillance when UVRI and the rest bring in medicines and vaccines. We follow them to see if those who they have injected have developed any side effects, and if so, we recall the medicine. That means the science was not well done. We recall the medicines from the market. We also do what we call pharmacovigilance to follow the efficacy of medicines in the population. In addition to the other drugs, we also do vaccines. A lesson was also learned in the recent past when COVID came. We had only about 18 manufacturers of medicine in the country. But today, as I speak, we have close to 60 manufacturers of different medicines and medical devices. We could not produce enough sanitizers at the time, but now we are self-sustaining. We can produce our own sanitizers. We did not have a facility to produce gloves. You know, at that time, when COVID came, they supplied themselves only gloves, and we remained waiting. Now we have a facility that can make gloves, and we use them in this country. So you can see, although COVID was an unfortunate event, it helped us to make industries for our own selves. So when it comes to vaccines, we work with other regulators, including the WHO. We contribute seat, both technically and skills, to the WHO to ensure that the vaccines that circulate in the world are of good quality. We have harmonization processes under the East African community where we are developing vaccines together with the other member states in Africa. Uganda, NDA, is a member of the African Medicine Agency. The recently established umbrella that covers all the regulators in Africa that have subscribed to be members. So Uganda is one of them. Actually, we fought hard to host the headquarters, but somehow we were let down by some few issues, so we couldn't host the headquarters. But our neighbors, Rwanda, now hosts the headquarters of the African Medicine Agency, and Uganda, NDA, is part of the steering committee of the manufacturing group, the steering group of medicines under the African Medicine Agency. We are also a member of the steering committee on vaccines. So work is going on, all is not lost. There is a lot of hope that we are going to have vaccines shortly in Uganda. We have already 2 manufacturers of vaccines, one for animals, Newcastle, is already being manufactured in Uganda, and the other different, there is another manufacturer you've read in the newspapers who is trying to make human vaccines. And the factory is at its infancy, but I hope when it is done, we'll be able to contribute to this noble cause. So I have not watched the details that you have covered, but in terms of skills and know-how, Uganda is ready. Maybe we may need to advocate for funds to put the structures in place. As NDA, we ensure you the support in terms of guidelines and expert, and we shall continue to contribute towards this noble cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dennis. I can't add much to your remarks. I want to recognize that in this house, we have very many institutions represented, including the farmer manufacturer associations. We have even individual manufacturers here. We have very, very relevant institutions to this conversation. So as we discuss, we'll get to know each other along the way, especially during the panel conversation and other interactions. So as we warm up for the documentary, I want to welcome the National Planning Authority has moved the journey with us in terms of having conversations around advancing regional vaccine manufacturing. And we are very grateful for their support. They have promised to continue engaging with us. And today we have Dr. Rule Ivan on behalf of the authority. We want to hear a few remarks, and then we'll have Dr. Morris usher us into the documentary.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the National Planning Authority and the chairperson of the authority, I want to also add my voice to the previous speakers to welcome you to this important engagement that has been well organized by AHAKI. Thank you so much for bringing us together as usual. And I believe that this launch that we're having today is not just a launch for a documentary, but it is the content that is in the documentary that is very important to us, because then it defines or makes a wake-up call for Ugandans and Africa to secure the future for their well-being and harnessing opportunities to grow the pharmaceutical sector. You recall the aspirations of Agenda 2063. One has a goal that we need to have a healthy and well-nourished citizens. And this is emphasizing all this effort. Similar to what I see here, Africa's Race to 2040, in Uganda we also have our Vision 2040. And the National Planning Authority has remained the custodian of this important document, which wants to transform us from a peasant society to a modern society. And on many occasions, the First Citizen has emphasized the science, technology, and innovation as the base for the actual transformation. But for you to have the science transform you, there are some fundamentals you have to work on around infrastructure, around the roads, around the bridges, around the hospitals, and the health centers. But having established a health center without medicine, you have a white elephant. we still have these problems that while we seem to be moving forward, we have some problems we have to fix here and there. I was looking at the recent figure, about 286 million is the import value for pharmaceuticals in the country. That accounts for about 4%. 286 US million, not Ugandan shillings. And that's 4% of the total import value. If you compare with the petroleum industry, the import is about 19%, and you might want to look at that as the most important area. But remember, medicines touch the well-beings of life. I can walk to work without fuel, but I can't walk to work if I'm not healthy. So the 4% is quite significant, and we need to think about how we can solve this problem. So having talked about that infrastructure, and now want to move to a policy and planning framework that will enable us actually move forward. And as you know, we have the National Industrial Policy and the 10-year industrialization plan. These are very important pieces of work that are supposed to help us move from the light industry, the heavy industry, and the sophisticated industries that talk to the pharmaceutical industry. And beyond having them as policies and plans, we now have to really have the actions. And this is where we are right now. I believe that we have had enough outcry now, having got COVID-19. Almost the entire population got COVID-19. Vaccines are not new to us now. We all fully understand why we should go get vaccines and why we should also have our own vaccines in our own country. So what should we do to get started? And this, I'm speaking in light of the efforts that are going on. That is the formulation of the 4th National Development Plan. If you read the 3rd National Development Plan, you realize that we have brushed over the issue of pharmaceuticals. But that's because the cloud is needed for us to move forward. And as we move forward, we have picked from the recent import substitution strategy, and the following actions are being considered in the NDP4. One is to support the local production of antimalarial and ARVs to at least 40%. For those of you who are from the government side, these are things that we need to capture in our program implementation action plans. The moment they miss, then we are missing it, because we have to touch the money at the planning level such that we actually emphasize, we actually have the results that we want to have. The second one, to support more local manufacturers for both medicines and other medical supplies. This will be in addition to Day Pharma and the quality chemicals and the many other scattered manufacturers that have been supported. Enhance research and development in indigenous medicine. Establish improved price preference policies for local medicine manufacturers. Attract and establish joint ventures in the internal medical-related industries. Support innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. I was having a discussion with someone on the table, and it's our feeling that it's almost impossible to attract an international company to invest in pharmaceuticals in the country. And therefore, the need to have joint partnerships and also grow our own innovations is very important. And then the other one that is quite important to NDA is establish standards and quality control systems, even beyond the local drugs that we have around, but even the international drugs that are yet to be produced in the country. The last one that is also very important is the training local human resources and attract skilled international human resource. These are some of the issues that we want to consider as we formulate our NDP4. Some of you are part of the process, and you can always keep on advising us. You know, the planner's work is to listen to everybody and then tell the story. So you're the ones to tell us the story. Before I wind up, I thought it is important to remember that vaccines or pharmaceuticals produced in Uganda should now target the region and the continent at large. We cannot sustain these markets. We cannot have enough in the local boundary to actually sustain the industries we want to produce. So it is important that we look beyond Uganda and harness the opportunities around after to ensure that we can sustain the industries that are producing here. And once this is done, we have answered the question, is it for trade export? Is it for well-beings of Ugandans? Or are we trying to fight the prices of the vaccines in the country? Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, this documentary launch creates yet another an opportunity for us to sharpen our thinking. I believe that from the documentary, some of us were able to watch it. Those of you who are going to watch it now will also appreciate the content. And this should get us thinking, even through the panel discussions we're going to have, on how best we can continuously usher in pharmaceutical manufacturing or vaccine manufacturing in the country. I thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We want to thank the Minister of Health, and we have a couple of officials in-house. Can we give a round of applause to the Minister of Health? And I think one of the major causes why we are here, it's behind the Minister of Health, because the conversations we are having, they are a concern of our health systems, of our health sector, and to ensure the protection of our health as a country. So we've been moving with the Ministry of Health in a couple of fronts to ensure our strategic partnerships and engagements as we serve the communities of this country and the region at large. And we want to thank Dr. Maurice Selu. Since we began this program of work, he has been very responsive to our engagements, but also very supportive and very informative, because it is through them that we get to appreciate what is happening in the country and in the region. And Doctor, we don't take that for granted. So at this juncture, Dr. Maurice, your remarks are going to usher us into the documentary, and immediately after your remarks, Solomon will be ushering in the documentary for our watch, and later we shall have a panel. You're welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Adopting the protocol that has been set, good afternoon, and you're welcome to this gathering. We would have had the leadership of the ministry here, but as we're speaking now, we have a quarterly review mission going on. So the PAs, the directors are all involved there, but they've sent me to represent them and to greet you. Now, the call to manufacture 60% of vaccine needed in the continent by the year 2040, you'll agree with me, is quite ambitious. Because one, 2040 is around the corner, and two, we have a lot of work to do. If you read the documents that you have and see the challenges that we have to work very hard. However, having said that, I also believe that it's possible. If we put deliberate effort, develop a clear roadmap, and adhere to it, I think we can do it. And we should. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it. However, again, this ambitious program will need government to commit to it. One, by providing conducive environment. We have to mobilize and provide the required finances to have this. Create an enabling policy environment, especially the regulatory framework for this to happen. And this is necessary, and we should have done it yesterday. The need for the continent to be self-reliant in the production of vaccine was uncovered during the COVID-19. As you well know, when vaccines were introduced, when they started manufacturing, for us, we had to wait for a while, but that's being modest. We had to wait for some time before we could access these vaccines. And to me, I don't blame anyone, and we shouldn't, because charity begins at home. even if we were the one who had manufactured this vaccine first, I don't think we would have sent it to the north. We would have first make sure that we are what? Well covered before we start spreading the vaccine elsewhere. But if we have, for instance, if we had developed vaccine manufacturing capacity, at least for the legacy of these traditional vaccines, we would have had where to begin from. Because what it means, we would have had the skilled human resource, we would have had the infrastructure, and most likely we would also have framework for financing, so that it would have been easier for us to get the technology transfer and produce what? These vaccines. And that means it would be easier for us to leverage on our capacity to produce traditional vaccine to repurpose them to produce the COVID vaccine and other vaccine for other epidemics and emerging epidemics. And I think that's one of the reasons why this partnership was formed, to make us that we should never again be taken by surprise. If anything happens, we should be ready and hit the ground running. And I think the environment is the environment for this to happen is ripe, and we should take advantage of it. One thing we, as you'll see from the documentary and what people have been said, and even the documents you have, the need and the demand for these vaccines is there. Two, what I know, the political leadership on the continent are committed to this. And three, the vehicle to steer this is there. That is the Partnership for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVM. So we should be ready to go. And most importantly, now we have a group of civil society organizations who are interested in this. And to me, this is important, because the civil society is capable and should keep putting pressure on all of us stakeholders involved, so that we don't what? We don't go astray and make sure that we reach our goal end. Personally, I have been privileged to be part of some of these technical groups which make undertakings and programs, especially in the ESC. We've made quite a number of decision and resolution where the summit of the head of states have approved, but years down the road, some of these things are not what? Implemented or partially implemented because of stakeholders' interests. And I don't think this undertaking is an exception. We are going to have strong stakeholders who are going to oppose it because they've been benefiting from the status quo. And as we plan and program, we should put systems in place to try, manage, and mitigate and identify these stakeholders and manage them. That's my appeal. And I think it's not my day, it's Rwanda's day. So you'll permit me to invite and call Mr. Solomon Serwanje to take us through the launch of the documentary. Thank you so much.
Another round of applause to Commissioner Dr. Maurice Seru. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you in a special way to this launch. I'm super excited to reveal to you what we've been working on for the last 6+ months. Professor Kalebu said he thought he had given up on it, but I think good food takes some good time to really boil. I am very scared. I am worried. Sometimes I get nightmares. The question that always keeps me awake is this: are we ready for another pandemic? Are we ready for the next pandemic? At the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are running to every hospital facility. Many of you here had patients. you moved from public facilities to private facilities. The medical industry shot its bills high. There came a time that we cannot do anything but to watch our loved ones die. Indeed, we still live with those memories, and they're still fresh in many of our minds. And God forbid if another pandemic strikes, I don't know what will happen to us. I know that we've been blaming the West very much about them being selfish with their vaccines and vaccine equity and equality and all these campaigns, farmer greed and all these other different campaigns that we've been putting up. Like one of the previous speakers said, we first cater about what's happening home and then we figure out what happens next. We have a very big challenge of propelling from 1% to 60% in 17 years. Quite ambitious, isn't it? Think about that. Currently 1%, and we have a target of 60% in the next 17 years. Is this really achievable? Is the question that we're all going to be discussing today. What are the dangers if we don't get there? Is it just a political statement that is made at the peak of it? Did our leaders just go to Addis Ababa, the African Union, and have coffee and breakfast and eat and take photographs and make these commitments? A very wonderful document, the Partnership for Africa's Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVAM. It's open, and I think many of you have received this in this invitation. I challenge us to go back and walk back in time to what we went through during the pandemic and perhaps reawaken that vigor, that energy that we all are supposed to have to actually hold our leaders accountable. And if you're in this space and you control budgets, you're in planning, you're in the Ministry of Health, you are in these different spaces of power, you're in civil society, I think that it's up to us as a people to remind our leaders that, look, in case a pandemic strikes, we will all be in it. Ladies and gentlemen, I really welcome you to now watch our latest work, and we want to say a special thank you to Afya na Haki for partnering with us on this project. It's a great piece of work, and in my view, one of the classics I've done in my entire journalism career. Karibu.
Mentioned COVID-19, and we all remember the loved ones we lost. The bill will still undergo scrutiny in the Parliament's Health Committee. Over 15 million people died. During the pandemic, according to the estimates from the World Health Organization. The pandemic caught us by surprise, overwhelming our health systems in both developed and developing countries alike. Medical workers on the front line fought on to the very end. Sometimes it was so hard to bear, watching people die as they gasped for breath. This was a state of emergency. What could save the world was a vaccine. For years, that's the fastest a vaccine has ever been developed, but most take about 5 to 10 years. Every second spent was a breath taken. Time was not on our side. Dozens of research teams around the world, largely from the global north, rushed to the labs to develop a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, using a mix of established techniques and technologies. Funding for a vaccine has never been greater, with billions of dollars invested in making a product that could help control the pandemic. The US, China, and Europe invested the most, as different pharmaceutical companies started the race for a vaccine. Moderna and Pfizer had established themselves as the leaders in the race of vaccine development by developing a COVID-19 vaccine. Both companies published their initial clinical data between July and August. By 31st December 2020, Pfizer developed a COVID vaccine with an efficacy of about 95%. February, Johnson & Johnson in March, Moderna in April, and many others as the months unfolded. With a vaccine in hand, vaccine nationalism was evident. Many high-income countries directly negotiated large advanced orders for vaccines, leaving resource-limited countries scrambling for access. AstraZeneca said it had reached an agreement with several governments, including the UK and the US, to produce at least 2 billion doses of vaccines. At the time, Africa remained desperate for vaccines. Despite the existence of international structures like the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access COVAX, Africa was left in the cold, unable to procure any vaccines for its people. COVAX strategized its approach by promoting fundraising, coordinating vaccine donations from countries with surplus doses, and facilitating the expansion of the manufacturing capacity. After waiting for months, donations started trickling in from COVAX facilities and other countries from the global north and China. This was a big lesson for African leaders. In April 2021, African Union Commission and the African Center for Disease Control held a summit calling for a framework of action that will enable Africa to manufacture 60% of its own vaccines by 2040. In 2022, the Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVAM, presented a framework that forms the blueprint of how the continent is going to achieve this goal by being self-reliant and meeting her vaccination needs. I'm investigative journalist Solomon Serwanja. I speak with African leaders, scientists, researchers, investors, and representatives from civil society to seek answers to what it will really take for Africa to manufacture 60% of its vaccines locally by 2040. It is 5th March 2023. African leaders, scientists, researchers, civil society, investors, and partners gather in Rwanda's capital Kigali for the Africa Health Agenda International Conference 2023. Top of the agenda is a candid discussion on how the COVID-19 tested the resilience of our health systems and the lessons that we learned.
We are not investing adequately in the health workforce. We are not investing adequately in pandemic preparedness and response machinery. Neither are we investing adequately in the health system itself. We are living through the consequences of a failure to adequately invest and prioritize public health needs in Africa. And this is the very impetus of Africa CDC's call for a new public health order, guided by the principles of local ownership, of local leadership, of equity, of innovation, and self-reliance.
There is a lot of optimism in the room, premising on our experience, especially on how the global north handled this emergency.
Where these investments were made, there was infrastructure, there was capacity, there was capability already in place that they could leverage to then accelerate activities. And this is the issue when it comes to Africa. We need to gear ourselves up. We have started now largely because of the trigger of COVID to do so. That needs to gain momentum by an order of magnitude or two into the future. But I'm encouraged and optimistic that if we build on this surge that we've had in terms of interest around vaccine development and manufacture on the continent, then we can achieve something.
But it will take more than just hope, according to Patrick Tipot, the Executive Director of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. Patrick, who also doubles as the Chief Science and Innovations Officer at BioVac, a South African firm that produces vaccines, tells me that vaccine manufacturing takes huge investment, and therefore there are some guarantees that have to be made before anyone sinks $1 into this venture, especially the market.
60% of the Gavi volumes come into Africa, so it's not trivial at all. So Gavi is a big market shaping player in Africa. And again, very encouragingly, Gavi is re-looking at its model to see how that can incentivize investments in vaccine production. But governments also have a role to play. The self-procuring countries need to put their money where their mouths are and come up with a plan that says, we will buy from local African producers as and when their products become available and meet the requisite quality requirements. We guarantee purchase from them.
But the guarantee of the market would require commitment from African states and their partners. For anyone to invest in vaccine manufacturing, numbers count.
Vaccine production relies on economies of scale to be cost effective. And the reason for that is that between 70% and 80% of the vaccine production costs are fixed costs. So the variable costs are only 20%, which means that as you increase volume, your costs don't increase proportionately. So when you build up to scale, the cost of goods go down, and that means that you can then begin to compete in the open market on a more competitive basis. So during that window period of 10 or years plus, African vaccine manufacturers require the support in terms of a premium that governments and other procuring agencies are prepared to pay in order to build this capacity, so that in the event of a pandemic, whenever it comes, we will have the capacity prepared and ready on the continent.
In some countries where economies of scale have been guaranteed, investments have already been made in research and development and setting up infrastructure for mass production. For example, BioVac in South Africa, Atlantic Life Science in Ghana, to mention but a few. Just to have a glimpse of what this means, I visited Cipla Quality Chemicals, a pharmaceutical manufacturing company located in Uganda's capital, Kampala. It is the largest pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in sub-Saharan Africa, certified by WHO to manufacture medicines for treating HIV/AIDS and malaria. Ajay Kumapal is the CEO of the pharmaceutical giant. The company produces and supplies 16 million doses of both antiretroviral drugs and antimalarials combined to over 18 countries across Africa.
Demand justifies what you can invest and how you're going to make sure there is a return on that investment. So starting point for Africa is demand. There is progress with AFCFTA that we can move goods from one place to other place without any barriers, and there is huge amount of change we have seen. But to reach that point, Africa has to start look itself as one market with no barrier among each other. Because if we look into smaller countries, and some with population of 10 million people, some with population of 40 million people, some with population of 150 million people, and somebody wants to invest in a country with 10 million population, the market is too small to justify that investment.
Ajay, however, emphasizes partnerships and specialization. If Africa is to achieve its goal of producing both vaccines and pharmaceuticals to treat its population,
we can decide that one country takes a lead in research and development and one takes a lead in manufacturing. easiest way to expand to is to add on to what you're already doing. So most easier companies to grow is those who are already established, and they expand because they already have know-how, they already have support, they already have an understanding. For them, it's always easier to build more capacity. Second one is to partner with someone, and that partnership can be in various spaces with respect to what leg of pharmaceutical value chain you start. Do you start with packaging, or you start with manufacturing, or you do the core API production? Third could be for small innovations, specifically for innovative therapies, right? New, like in today's world, beyond mRNA, now DNA. Now those are smaller investment like innovators, and then you invest them as seed investment or startups. Then you outgrow them as they started to operate on a model which is successful, which could be defined by demand.
Speaking of research and development, one of the core programs of PAVAM is putting in place vaccine research and development centers and coordinating platforms. It all starts here. It is where the brainwork begins, developing the vaccine. It takes scientists, sophisticated equipment, and heavy investment to get through the process of producing a vaccine. One such place is the Uganda Virus Research Institute, a center of excellence in research on viruses in Eastern Central Africa. Equipped with the state-of-the-art technology and machinery, as well as human resources, the center has been studying different viruses including HIV, Marburg, Ebola, and the latest COVID-19. Professor Pontiano Kalebu heads the institute.
For vaccine development, many people look at the end product of a vaccine, but there are so many things that are involved. For instance, we've been working at, if you want to have a vaccine, what immune response do you want to induce? Yeah? There are people here who have been studying for a long time to understand an immune response a vaccine should induce for HIV. Yeah? So they study the immune responses, that this is what is needed. That contributes to vaccine development. The people who are looking at the viruses. What viruses do we have? And which composition to put into a vaccine? That's very important. Yeah? The people who are doing clinical trials, that's important. We have been looking at transmitted viruses to understand how they look so that we can design an HIV vaccine. We have not developed an HIV vaccine, but we have been contributing. But more recently, we have been, even before COVID, I can tell you, before COVID, we had one of our students who collaborated with Imperial College to start a vaccine manufacture facility, yeah, for messenger RNA, interestingly, even before COVID. And we sent our student to London to design a vaccine for Rift Valley fever. He designed it, it went into mice, it was nice. Now he has reproduced it here. Yeah. And that, as he was doing this, that's when COVID came. So we started thinking about this even before COVID. So we have really students and scientists who are working on RNA vaccines here.
Though the process has been slow, the center is going into clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccine.
Currently, we're working on COVID vaccines, yeah, from the bench, from the lab. We have reached at a level where we want to test these vaccines in mice. That's easier. But to go into humans, you need good manufacturing practice. We don't have the facility. We have started talking to contract this out to others. And that is possible. You don't need to do the whole chain. You can design and have your IP, patent issues, you design a vaccine, then you contract another company to do the GMP because you have not reached, you don't have any facility that can do GMP. That is possible. You retain your scientific discovery and IP issues, but others can do the final bits.
He, however, opines that Africa's focus on research and development has been rather blurry, with limited funding affecting their ability to do advanced vaccine research.
But there is not a lot of investment in research, as you know. We have not reached all the goals that African governments promised many years back to invest in research and development. That's a big problem. But also in manufacture, if you leave research and development alone, but also to develop the capacity to have facilities that are going to make vaccines and diagnostics and drugs at the international standards. We are very, very much behind. But we've been talking about this over a period of time. For many of you, you are hearing this because of COVID. I've been in many African meetings for years during the time of HIV/AIDS. We're talking about all this. How do we invest in research and development for vaccines? It's a little bit complicated.
Professor Kalebu is now mooting for the idea of African unity to collectively work together to develop and support different research and development centers of excellence. But as the interest for African states to invest in scientific research and development grows, Professor Kalebu is advocating for technology transfer.
As you know, in Africa, we have a few countries that have plants, manufacturing plants, about 6 of them. The low-hanging fruit is to really make negotiations with the vaccine developers to transfer so that they can do fill and finish. Some of these countries are doing that so that we can, South Africa, Senegal, Egypt, Morocco, and all that, so that we can, even without doing our own R&D, but negotiate intellectual property and markets and do that.
A classic example of where technology transfer has worked very well is in South Africa, where BioVac formed a partnership with Sanofi and Pfizer.
In summary, government went to these companies and said, we have a local vaccine manufacturer called BioVac. If you've won the tender for product 1, if you agree to transfer part of your technology to BioVac for localizing certain aspects of the vaccine manufacturing value chain, we would extend that tender by 3 years to a total of 5 years. So for 5 years, you would have unchallenged access to the South African market and supply to the Department of Health for your product. In the case of Sanofi, it was the Hexaxim. And it was attractive enough for Sanofi to consider that as a deal, formed a transaction with BioVac, and the rest is history, in that technology transfer has led to BioVac having vial filling and finishing capability that has been built up over a period of time.
But even with this, Neha Agarwal, the Global Diagnostics Programs Director at PATH, says that Africa needs to look beyond just technology transfer in vaccine manufacturing.
You know, I think technology transfer is something, it's easy on paper and very hard to do in reality. And so I think you need experts who've been there, that have done that have been integral to the actual innovation process. And I think that there are a lot of partners who are interested and really willing to support technology transfer. So I think we need to tap into that a bit more. When we think about things like, what are the various reagents and raw materials that we need to make a vaccine? A lot of those are hosted at places like NIBSC, the National Institute for Biologics and Standards, which is out of the UK. That's actually a government entity that runs that. And then there's other companies like the big pharmaceutical companies that do a lot of their antibody manufacturing themselves. They have very little incentive to make those reagents available to smaller scale manufacturers based in LMICs or even based in the global north.
Neha also argues that sustainable vaccine manufacturing will require financial independence from the global north, or better still, partnerships.
We need to localize the funding ecosystem, because if it's still global north partners funding the localization, what if funding dries up? What if there's another pandemic and all of a sudden research dollars go back to global north priorities? So the more we can take steps to localize the entire ecosystem, then only will we really have sustainability.
The issue of financing has been central to the discussion of Africa's dream of self-reliance on its pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Back at the Africa Health Agenda Conference, Dr. Magda Robalo poured her heart out to challenge African leaders and the private sector to take keen interest in funding the entire vaccine manufacturing value chain.
We need to look into our own internal resources and then look for external partnerships to complement our efforts, but it cannot be. It's a matter of sovereignty. You cannot have an ambitious goal of producing 60% of the vaccines your people need by 2040 and then sit and wait for foreigners to bring the money for you to do it.
Another key issue that has been raised by health experts is the establishment of quality management systems to ensure that all vaccines produced in Africa are at global standards. In fact, one of the programs of PAVAM is strengthening national regulatory agencies and regional centers of regulatory excellence. Dr. Margaret Sigonda is one of the people championing this cause. She is the head of health programs at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and currently leading the regulatory workstream of the PAVAM framework.
With regulation, you can be assured that the patients will have access to safe, efficacious, and good quality medical products. Without it, the market will be flooded by substandard and falsified medical products, and that's a risk to public health. So you want to make sure that you have very robust systems to ensure that the risk posed by medicines is actually averted. And another good news is that on the continent, we already have 5 national regulatory agencies that have attained the WHO maturity level 3, which is really a criteria that is used to measure the robustness and the trustedness of your regulatory system in a country. So that is good news for Africa, because even for AMA, to have a strong AMA, you require strong national regulatory agencies. And so we think that with the 5 national regulatory agencies that have attained such a maturity status, then they can become like anchors and mentors to other regulatory agencies that are aspiring to also mature, and eventually we can have a really robust regulatory ecosystem on the continent once AMA is fully operational.
Dr. Sigonda is quite optimistic about the progress so far made on the regulatory framework and support to national and regional bodies.
And to date, as I'm speaking now, we already have some continental guidelines developed already to guide the member states in undertaking these activities. We've also been able to create what we call continental framework for vaccines lot testing and lot release. And essentially, this framework for vaccines testing and lot release is aiming at assisting especially vaccine producing countries that do not have laboratory capacity to be able to benefit from those that have capacity. Currently on the continent, we have South Africa that has capacity to do vaccines testing and lot release, and Egypt. These are the 2 countries. Others are still trying to build their capacity.
Their efforts to operationalize the African Medicines Agency, which will be the continental regulatory body to oversee vaccine manufacturing on the continent.
African Medicines Agency is a very critical piece when it comes to strengthening the regulatory ecosystem on the continent. And I think it should also be known that the African Medicines Agency is an offshoot of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, because AMA is a treaty-based organization and it requires countries to ratify before they become members of the state parties of AMA. And so currently we only have 24 countries that have ratified and deposited the instrument of ratification with the African Union Commission. So it may take time to get all the countries on board, but the good thing is that since we already have an existing initiative, the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, which is catering for all the 55 member states, so it makes it easier to make sure that all the countries are supported and all countries are part and parcel of operationalization of the African Medicines Agency.
But as we wait for all countries to deposit their instruments of power to the African Medicines Agency, there are efforts to approve some vaccines that have been developed recently.
We are working on a program which is focusing on vaccines development for Lassa fever in West Africa. Lassa fever is a disease that is affecting mostly the West Africa region. And we've reached a point where we have dedicated, program to do epidemiological studies, but also R&D for vaccines for Lassa fever. And we are also capacitating the regulators and the ethics committee to be able to give the necessary approval so that such vaccines can be availed, can be accessible by the population in the Western African region. We're also looking into, for instance, Rift Valley fever that is affecting mostly sub-Saharan Africa. We're looking into how best can we use these structures that we have, the regional structures, the national regulatory agents, the ethics committee, to provide oversight on and making sure that we have such vaccines available to the people on the continent for diseases that affect us most.
At the tail end of the vaccine manufacturing value chain is the demand for the vaccines. It is one thing making the vaccines, it is another thing for the public to accept the vaccines. There is growing vaccine hesitancy among the population, which in itself is a challenge. Dr. Moses Mulumba is the Executive Director of Afya na Haki, a civil society organization whose focus is on promoting health and justice through the Afrocentric ideology. He argues that it is important to involve communities at the grassroots level in the vaccine manufacturing conversation.
The missing point in the entire conversations on vaccine and regional manufacturing is that we have kept it very high level. We've kept it at a policy level, and we are forgetting that the end is at the end user who is going to be benefiting. So we are not engaging them enough. People in the communities don't relate with the science that we are discussing. People at a country level are also not relating enough with the conversations at the African Union. And this is not surprising because we have seen that even at the sub-regional level, like at the East African community, at the SADC level, we are never capable of translating the conversations of sub-regional level to the national level. Now, if we can't translate that to the national level, a huge opportunity is missed. And it becomes very difficult for people at a country level and within communities to pick up these global regional important conversations.
He argues that communities are also central to holding governments accountable to their commitments if well mobilized by civil society.
This starts with community mobilization. Once the community knows what their governments have committed, through civil society organizations, through the patient groups, it is going to be very easy. We've seen that things like maternal mortality communities have been able to hold governments accountable. We've seen that people have been able to hold parliamentary conversations, and they have rejected budgets which parliaments are passing without increasing them. And in some sectors we've seen improvement. So this is very, very important. Community mobilization and accountability mechanisms as part of the governance for these vaccines that we are talking about is going to be very central and critical.
Accountability, according to Dr. Mulumba, is advocating for legal and policy frameworks to support vaccine manufacturing and trade within Africa.
When I see positive narratives around the fact that it's possible to have 60% by 2040 vaccine manufactured on the continent, I think that is very promising. But we need to follow it up with political support, political will. We need to follow it up with coordination, proper partnerships that we need to be seeing. But we also need to be foresighted because we don't only need vaccines. There is a whole infrastructure that is required. How do you deliver the vaccines? How do you ensure that all these other commodities that accompany the vaccines are actually followed? And it's very important. So it's important that the ambition is there, but this ambition needs to be followed with policies and implementation of those policies.
Legal and policy frameworks will, however, not be the magic bullet. Professor Oyewale Tomori, a virologist from Nigeria, has been advocating for African unity as a means of achieving vaccine independence.
We need to look at diseases as another disease, as another colonial enemy. As another enemy which must combine together. As we overcame the colonial people, so also we will be able to overcome diseases by uniting together, bringing in all the resources we have. It's not every country in Africa that has every talent, but if we pull all our resources together, we can overcome and stop being a beggar to the world.
Unity, according to Professor Tomori, will also require pulling financial resources together to support vaccine manufacturing.
If all Africa decide we're going to buy our vaccine from Senegal, Senegal will be sustainable. But if we now say, oh no, we're waiting for bilateral assistance, we're waiting for donation, instead of putting our money into it, of course the man who gives you the donation is not going to let you buy from Senegal. He's going to let you buy from his own country. That's where the problem is, that division, not coming together. That's why it makes vaccine production in Africa unsustainable. But all we require, as I said, we cannot produce all the vaccine we need, but 4, 5, 6 of them, have countries that have the capacity, let them produce the vaccine. And then every one of us in Africa will buy from that person. We will sustain it. And then they can even move on to other things in future. But so long as we are still have that mentality that, oh, donation has to come or something, we will never get to that level.
Africa's vaccine manufacturing agenda must be fronted with political will to provide great leadership and direction. Professor Tomori is now challenging leaders to rise to the occasion.
Long-term investment is what not Europe, what it is today. Our own is a short-term thing sometimes. We have what you call political will. But political will is mere talk. It has to be backed up by commitment, and that's the fund. Is it that we don't have the fund? I don't think so. I think it's because we're misusing the funds we have, and that's why we're where we are today. How many resolutions have we signed in Africa? They are more than the disease that we but what did we do with the resolution?
He fears that the worst could come in case we do not move fast.
No matter what happens, when the epidemic goes, that's the end of the epidemic, Africa forgets what is happening until the next one comes. The lessons we learned from the past one, we forget easily. And we start running helter-skelter when the next one comes. And I think that attitude has to change.
Nevertheless, he remains hopeful about the future.
I have hope. I will not be talking to you now if I didn't have hope. I'm 70-something years old, and I've been struggling for this for the last 50 years. If I'm still talking, it's because I have hope. And the hope is may not be me, maybe me at the background to talk to you, but for you young people, to take up Africa in your own hand and say it should not be like what was happening to my grandfather.
Africa's dream of manufacturing 60% of its vaccine needs by 2040 is quite ambitious, but all of us have hope that if we start today by being deliberate about implementing the blueprint in the PAVAM commitment, hold ourselves accountable to the targets set, we shall indeed get there. For now, though, I remain hopeful that one day we shall stop begging and start giving. Solomon Serwanja, AIJ unveils.
Okay. Thank you. Can we put the lights on? Thank you very, very much. Can we give a round of applause to the team at the African Institute for Investigative Journalism? There's a lot of hard work put into this assignment. It discusses so many things. Can the team from the African Institute for Investigative Journalism please stand up? And so we know the people behind. These are the people. Thank you. Can we clap for them once again? This is part of the team that worked hard to ensure that this project is out. And as you might have seen, it discusses a lot. Have you learned something? Did you learn something by a show of hands? You didn't learn nothing. Jesus Christ. Okay, so this story really, can we put the lights on, please? The main lights on. This story anchors our conversation, and I want to invite my panelists today. I promise that we'll be out of this place in the next about 30 minutes from now. Let me invite Dr. Adrian Dungu Chivumbi. He's the Secretary General of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. Dr. Adrian Dungu Chivumbi, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. Please, karibu. I want to invite Mrs. Jen Nalunga, Executive Director of Siatini. Ma'am, you're very, very welcome. Karibu sana. I also want to invite Mrs. Ziad Nabembezi. You're very welcome, ma'am. Karibu, please. Thank you for coming. Professor Ponchano Kalebu is supposed also to be joining us on this panel, but he's just concluding a meeting. I'm sure he's going to be back. I think I should bring back the commissioner, because Part of this is accountability. Karibu, please. I need, and the NDA, of course. Karibu, come and have a seat. And we have a chit chat on some of these big issues that have been raised. Please, Karibu, come and have your seat here. Don't worry. It's going to be great. Can we have extra mics? The guys on the PA, can we have extra mics? Karibu. Yeah. Extra mics, please. Do we have any extra mics? We only have one. Is there a second mic? Oh yeah, thanks. Maybe we can put the other backdrop, eh? It helps. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting to join my panel. We're just going to really take a deep dive into this dream. I call it a dream. Isn't it ambitious that you can elevate from 1% to 60% in 17 years? We want to tackle on a number of things. And I think I should start with Jen. No, let me start with Dr. Adrian. Kindly, please. Help me pass the mic. Dr. Adrian, you are in this world of pharmaceuticals. You're in the thick of it. Many of us perhaps are not so much inside, but you are inside. You are representing an association here. So many things have come up here. Investment, right from research and development to manufacturing, to the market, to the quality. So many things have been mentioned in this documentary. I would love to hear from you. Is this dream achievable? And let's start there. Is this dream achievable, or we are just making political statements? Because you're in the pharmaceutical itself. You understand the investment very well. Dr. Dungu, Karibu.
Just to briefly answer that question, there is a saying that each dream begins as an idea, and the longer and the more persistent you are with your idea, you end up realizing your dream. So the dream, to me, is realizable, but the focus is, are we willing to get there as individuals? That would be the focus.
What will it, as pharmaceutical, as the industry, have you been supported? What will it take for you in the pharmaceutical industry to actually invest in this dream? Because it will not only take government commitment, but also it takes the private sector to be actively. So it looks like it's going to take both a partnership between the private sector and governments across the continent.
Okay. To answer you, in the private sector, you balance between resources and risks available. So you target your goals according to what you can achieve in the short-term goals with less risks, and in a long-term goal with broader risks, I would say, but knowing you are getting to the direction you want. But when it comes to vaccine manufacturing, as the private sector, they can realize it. But this is a goal which has to be supported with other stakeholders in order to make the dream of a private sector player realizable. So,
all right, Dr. Adrian, I'll come back to you with the numbers. Let me come to Jen. Jen, one of the common denominators here is before anyone sinks a single dollar, they have to be guaranteed of the market. That has really come out strongly. I mean, when you go to CIPLA, and I'm sure all of you here have had an opportunity of visiting Quality Chemicals, they had to get a guarantee of the market for them to go into full production. Biovac, same thing. The guys who invested, that the guy from Biovac was saying that we had to guarantee this person that you'll have exclusive access to the South African market. The ability to be able to get market is very fundamental in the investment, Jane, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But maybe thank you so much. That was really, really brilliant. Thank you so much, and to the entire team. The issue of markets, it's very, very important. And I think this touches to the whole issue of the anti-economic policy, which, by the way, is a bit lacking in the documentary. Because when we talk about a market, we're also talking about trade policies, we are talking about trade agreements, we are talking about procurement. And procurement policies will be able to procure those medicines. And I think even the president raised that issue when he was talking about PEPFAR. We get aid from outside. Because, for example, vaccines to guarantee availability of those vaccines, but so what kind we can be able for the time being get these vaccines, but be able also to support local production. The issue of tariffs, the kind of tariffs or taxes which we impose, our countries can't manufacture vaccines unless we get the TRIPS waiver. We limit the extent of patent protection. We can be able to use the data they have used to be able to manufacture drugs. You talked about issues of investment. Investment, I will give you an example. When you look at our investment code as Uganda, policies to ensure that we support our local manufacturing. But trade policies are not just at national level, they're at regional level. As East Africa, we have a common external tariff. How can that tariff help us to grow our local competitive vaccine manufacturing entities? That's also an issue we need to look at. We have negotiated the Continental Free Trade Area and pharmaceuticals are there. But when you look at that agreement again, we need to have a deeper look at it if we can be able to achieve this ambition. So we are looking at trade-related policies and agreements at the continental level, but also at the global level. The WTO negotiations on the TRIPS waiver is an issue which we need to work on also.
Yeah, Jen, you hinted a little bit about it. I'm sorry to stay with you a little bit just for a minute. The FCTA, it's a hope many of us are banking on that it could solve a lot of the challenges. Look, we are talking about vaccine investment takes about what? Doc, you're in this market. About what? How many millions of dollars, for example, on average? About $50 million. Now, that's quite a chunk of money. And for a person to invest $50 million to start, this vaccine manufacturing, there is need for a market. And many of us have been really hoping against hope that the FCTA will come in handy. And I think it's Agile from CIPLA who said that Africa needs to start looking at itself as one market and therefore attract investment into the pharmaceutical industry. Why then are you, I was going to say you, but why then are African governments taking, why has this dragged on, on and on and on? We have refused to finish the FCTA. When you look at guys who are in the pharmaceutical industry, they say we always struggle, exporting to this, exporting to this, exporting to this. In a minute.
Okay, 1 minute. I think in a way it's also the lack of commitment. You talked about it, the issue of political will by our leaders. Because, for example, the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, we are hopeful that it can be able to enable a continental market. But you find countries that negotiating with other parties outside Africa, with the European Union, with the US, providing better terms than they are providing in the CFTA. And that's going to break the CFTA, So the issue of political will, the issue also walking that talk, knowing that this is what we want by 2040, and this is what we are going to do, and this is how we are going to do it. That political will is lacking in Africa.
All right, thanks a lot. So let me just come to Zeda. Zeda, is this a dream? Can this come true? Can we just wake up in 2040 and we have Uganda heavily investing research and development? Dr. Pontiano is releasing is doing clinical trials, then he sends them to South Africa to do the mass production, then there's labeling, then there's... What can we do? Honestly, what can we do for us to save our children? Because tomorrow, when a pandemic strikes, we will be fighting for our lives. What do we need to do now to make sure these things happen?
Thank you, Solomon. So I've had an opportunity to be involved in quite a number of discussions around vaccine manufacturing. And my observation is, considering that this is a public health order, it's mainly being approached from the perspective of, once we put these products on the market, they will move because the public needs them. And I think there's an assumption that it's just a matter of production and people will willingly purchase because we need to build public health security, among others. I once asked one person I was with in a conference, I asked them, where does the issue of financial sustainability lie in this discussion? And that's exactly the answer they gave me was, I know these are public health goods, we're not going to focus so much on the commercial aspect. And I think that is where we might be failing if it is not thoroughly focused on. If you're looking at the market today, the African vaccine market, different countries have differential market dynamics, depending on, are you being supported by Gavi or are you a self-procuring entity? So this definitely is giving us a wide pricing corridor. What do I mean? If, for example, I was looking at, we have what we call the MI4A database. It's the WHO procurement database that will show you the volume of vaccines that are moving across the different regions, who are the key suppliers, what is the price per dose. So let me take an example of yellow fever. The price for yellow fever, I think as of 2021 across the majority of suppliers for the Gavi-supported countries was at approximately $1.03 per dose. For the non-Gavi supported countries, it was approximately $1.95 a dose. So for a manufacturer, this means that you're going to be experiencing a pricing corridor that is having a lower bound as the Gavi price, which is, let me say, 1.3 cents per dose, and your upper bound is 1.75 cents a dose for yellow fever. Now, it goes back to us, can we work around, or how can we work around to ensure that the unit conversion cost per dose is falling within that range? Because as much as we're advocating for the government to provide, to actually purchase these vaccines, outside issues of political influence, can our governments actually afford to buy African-made vaccines? And I think that the conversation might also need to look at that aspect of beginning with the end in mind. We want to put these vaccines on the market, but what is going to be a price that can actually penetrate the African market? Now, once we have an idea on the unit conversion cost, from the data we have available, then we need to work backwards. We have so many different areas of investment required, right from research and development, we have the legal and regulatory, there are trade policies, all seemingly needing exorbitant amounts of funding. But then the question is, where should we prioritize our funding to be able to meet that goal? Then where should we advocate for a sharing model for funding? Because all these initiatives cannot get direct funding. Some we shall have to think of sharing maybe resources with other countries that have already developed capacity to support. Then others we can directly fund. So with that kind of thought process, I think it can further add to us understanding, once we are even sitting to talk about trade policies, what is the contextualization and specific details we want to put in these trade policies, because we have our end in mind. Whether we're talking about the regulatory aspect, we have the end in mind. So the issue I believe that continues to miss is how much can these vaccines really go for on this market and they gain access?
Yeah, let me just come in there because I think it's clear what we heard from the documentary. I think that's the guy from BioVac, Tipo. You know, it works with numbers. So he said, if I'm guaranteed that the entire continent is going to be treated, I'm going to supply polio vaccines or tetanus vaccines or from as a manufacturer, and I mean, I'm really, really guaranteed of this market that African governments will buy from me, then perhaps that could bring down the cost of production and therefore come up with a competitive rate. But those guarantees have to be made by the big boys who actually do the procurements, the Gavis, you know. How do we make Gavi, for example, say, please, when you're procuring vaccines, do not get out of Africa. We have a manufacturer in South Africa. We have a manufacturer in Senegal. Please procure from them directly. I think that guarantee of the market can help significantly reduce down on the cost of production to competitively get on that market rate and perhaps, you know, compare with Pfizer or the big pharmas, the big five.
Yes, but they have to actually put figures in place, not just a general agreement, but what is the actual cost you're willing to purchase these vaccines at once you put them on the market. It allows for now detailed thinking across what are the different entities, how are we going to approach innovation across the different entities to meet that goal. Or in the event that we can't meet that goal for the next 5 to 10 years, a manufacturer might also want to start planning, how should I strategically differentiate my manufacturing product mix so that as I'm having a revenue downside on the vaccines, I have other products that are helping me to cover up for the loss I'm making.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Zaid. Let me just bring in Dr. Sarah here. I'm sorry I'm going to hold you accountable because you're from government. So I'd love to hear about the commitment from government of Uganda. I needed the Ministry of Health on this aspect. It's a very, very important aspect. We have made, I think the PAVAM document has timelines. I think it's 10% until 2025. You know, there are all these timelines that we're doing. Let's go and talk specifically about Uganda. How seriously is the government of Uganda taking this issue of vaccine manufacturing? Dr. Sero.
Before I go, I talk about what the government is doing. I want to talk about the issue of convincing Gavi to procure locally from the continent. You see, let's be real. Who funds Gavi? Who funds Gavi? And what is in for the funders if they procure from here? If we can answer that, then we can think of going to them and convincing them. I think the thing what we have to do, we have to generate our own resources in the continent to be able to sustain the industry. But as long as we are thinking that those people will mobilize their money when they have even a developed industry to produce this vaccine, that they will bring it and give it to you. To me, that's a dream which may not be realized. But I think as government, I won't talk about vaccine per se. I'll talk about the incentive we have to promote local production. I'll start with CIPLA. When Quality Chemical started, I think that mostly, was it 2007 or what? Before even they started, they needed a guarantee that there's a market, what we call an off-take agreement, which we did. And over time, we've been doing it with many of these companies coming around. We're going to produce. What are you going to guarantee market? But again, as Minister of Health or government can only guarantee market for the public sector, which is not big enough for the what? For the industry. But I think moving forward, Minister of Health, even as government, we are also trying to advocate for regional integration. We are saying, as someone was saying, I think it was CEPLA, why don't we have integrated market rather than having this single market that we have now, KPI producing this for Uganda? Why don't we say, if Uganda is producing this, that's the thinking of the Minister of Health. If Uganda is producing this, then let Rwanda produce this, so that there is market for each what product. But as long as we continue working in silos, Uganda produces, let's say, antiviral, Tanzania produces, the Democratic Republic of Congo produces, we won't realize it. So I think our leaders are trying to make sure we realize integration as far as what? Manufacturing is concerned. But as I said earlier in my statement, it won't be easy. Because a united Africa is a threat to the world what? Order. You can imagine someone who has been a beggar now becomes self-sustaining. What is it in the interest of the donor or not? Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, but I mean, we can start somewhere, can't we?
Yes. Where we should start? To me, we should start by mobilizing our own resources in Africa to sustain these undertakings, rather than thinking Gavi, UNFPA, which are heavily funded by different countries with specific interests that they're going to give us, spend their money here. The point is I'm making simple. We mobilize our own funds on the continent and support these undertakings.
Thanks, Dr. Sero. I have some issues, but I can explain.
That's my opinion.
Thanks a lot. Let me come back to Dr. Dennis here. One of the things that came out strongly here is quality assurance. And there are conversations of having the Africa Medicine Agency that, of course, up to now, I don't know if we have ratified to that, but there are conversations around ensuring quality. That if I brought a vaccine from Senegal, and I also brought a vaccine from the United States, that you will not say, I don't want the vaccine from Senegal, because anyway, it's up to the international standards. So I would love to hear from you as a regulator. I wanted you to underscore the importance of establishing a strong regulatory framework and body for Africa, and also to know if Uganda has really ratified to the African Medicine Agency and where we are.
Well, thank you for the question. To start with, Uganda has ratified. We are a member of the African Medicine Agency. In my remarks, I told you we wanted to host it, and you couldn't host it unless you are a member. But we lost, and yes, and we are now the third deputy president of that organization. Our Minister of Health, she's a vice president to that organization. Now, when it comes to quality assurance as regulators, NDA is one of the pre-qualified laboratories. I would invite you to come to our lab, and by the way, you'll have a very good documentary to see what we are doing currently. We are pre-qualified by WHO. We test, whatever we test is not disputable. You can Google us on anywhere. Our lab is one of the best, not in Africa only, but in the rest of the world. So in terms of quality assurance, you have seen some, when patients go to a pharmacy, they will ask that I want a UK-made product, not an Indian-made product. That is an opinion with the patients. But the standards, for example, of importing medicines in Uganda are similar. We use the same yardstick. So whatever is sold in the market that has come in illegally has gone through the quality assurance system. The quality assurance is the same. And the drugs, including vaccines, are able to hit the target as the manufacturer intended in the time of planning. So it is very important to have a very good laboratory or quality assurance system in Africa. You'll find that African countries, as the others have said, are at different levels of development. And because they work in silos, they are not able to learn from each other. So Uganda, we are ahead. By the way, to tell you that in Africa and in East Africa, we are a leader in good manufacturing this. So if you want to learn anything to do with manufacturing, in this come to Uganda tutorials or agency. So the issue of quality assurance cannot be underscored. It is very important. And as we talk about manufacturing, it should move hand in hand with the quality assurance, that is laboratory testing.
Yeah. Let me just stay with you a little bit. When you have a conversation with the CIPLA team, and that's one of the challenges they have, because then their medicine is checked here, and then wherever they export, they have to go through another quality check. And this comes along with payments, you know. So having a harmonized African Medicines Agency would be very critical in also guaranteeing that market. And that really reduces on the costs that the business person is incurring. How fast can we move to have the African Medicines Agency operationalized fully on the continent?
It has started, because the paperwork now, we are working on the paperwork. So different regions have come up. For example, the ESC, we have harmonized. Now, if a product is authorized in Uganda, it can move freely in East Africa. We have a similar arrangement in South Africa called the Zanzibona. We have a similar arrangement in West Africa, ECOWAS. So these regional blocks are coming together to form the African Medicines Agency. Well, in its infancy, as you've heard Margaret Sigonda saying that only about 21 have ratified. So others are dragging their feet because we don't trust each other. So when we come to the same table and trust each other, Uganda leads in that area, have trusted the initiative, and we are able to move together. But I don't know if anybody is testing the quality chemical medicines that are moving in Africa, because the quality chemical industries is pre-qualified by WHO. So it is a redundant test, and as usual, it is just wastage.
Okay. I don't know if we have a lot of time really to start dragging our feet on ratifying to the African Medicines Agency's other countries. It's quite annoying in my view, because this is a very, very fundamental pillar in the PAVAM initiative. But let me, Professor Pontiano, sorry we missed you a bit. I wanted you to say something about research. Just help me pass the microphone, please. The aspect, how important is the investment of research and development in the vaccine manufacturing value chain? I wanted you to speak a little bit about that, because it's very central. That's where everything starts.
Indeed, that's where everything starts. And this is where a lot of investments go. In vaccine research, by the time you see a final product, one product like this, there's been a lot of other products that have been tried, tested in the lab, but they have not moved to the next stage. So there are a lot that goes on in the lab that never comes out, yeah? But still that is important. It's out of the a lot that we do that leads to the final product. And sometimes also we think about just the product, but before you get the product, there's a lot you need to know in research and development. Yeah? You need to understand which immune responses your vaccine should induce. You need to know whether host diversity will affect your immune response. You need to know when you formulate, are you going to induce antibodies? Do you need to induce T cells? Do you need to induce the immune response to the mucosa or in the blood? There's a lot that needs to be done. So sometimes we see the product, but the research that goes on, and that is very, very expensive. And the reason people fear, many African countries risk investing in research and development is because you may never get the end product. Because when we invest, we want to see, are we going to get value for money? Are we going to get something that is commercially, that can be marketed? But we need to know there's a risk. There's a lot that do that advances science, of course, but never leads to a product. But we need, if we are to have products in Africa, we need to invest in research and development. Of course, now people talk about fill and finish. It's not your product, it's somebody's product, but you come, fill and finish. But if we are to go backwards from design of antigens, from design of vaccines, we need to go to the bench, invest in research and development so that we can have eventually the products that we need. So as we talk about investing in vaccine research and development, we should not forget about that very early innovation that we need that will lead us to the final product. It's very expensive, it is risky, but there's no way out. If Africa is to get their own product that we can really patent and we have intellectual property, we need to start from the bench.
Very important. I can't agree more with you, but Prof, let me stay with you a little bit and I'll come back to Dr. Adrian. See, when COVID-19 broke up, what we saw is the guys who had established their infrastructure and the research, everyone rushed to the lab. You know, we saw guys coming up with consortiums, sharing information, going deep into the DNA, you know, mRNA, I don't know if that is right, but yeah. So they leveraged on the research, the strong research and development teams, and they started somewhere. And I want to hear from you, and for you to make it very strong that we need to really get serious with investing in research and development. And perhaps the issue that you talked about specialization, that if Uganda is going to be established as a center of excellence for research and development, then we should invest in that and say, part of the value chain for vaccine manufacturing, for us, we will actually put money in research and development, maybe put money in the infrastructure or GMP or everything. Yeah, it's very important. And how many of you have been to the Uganda Virus Research Institute? By the show of hands. Uganda Virus Research Institute. Okay, I'm going to ask Professor Kalebo to give us a chance for you to tour, because I think you need it. I have had an opportunity of visiting there. It is amazing. Like, expensive equipment. We're having professors in the lab, like really, really sophisticated people in there and dealing with all these sophisticated things. I would love him to give you an opportunity for you to come and see what they're doing there. Amazing work. But Prof, I just wanted you to speak to that. And also, how do we put pressure on our governments to take this issue of research and development very seriously?
And you see, COVID vaccine came out very quickly. People may think, how come this has come out very quickly? Is it? But these people who developed these vaccines, they had invested for a long time. I think COVID, partly, there are many reasons why COVID vaccines came out faster. It's an easier virus, I think, than others. There's a lot of funding, but they really worked using the technology that has been developed over the years to work on other infections, TB, malaria, HIV. A colleague who developed the messenger RNA vaccine for Moderna, I know him very well. We have worked together for a very long time in HIV. HIV has worked on HIV, has failed. Even it tells me now, mRNA will never work for HIV. But they have invested over a very, very long time. So the fact is that we cannot ignore R&D if in the end we think Africa should be at the forefront of having products. No, it starts from the bench. So we need to invest from the bench, and we need to know, because we know for politicians, for the population, they want quick results. Yeah. Now people are asking us, where is the COVID vaccine? Yeah. But you have to know that if you are to go into research, it's long-term investment, but the investment is worth it because you are looking at the longer-term goal. Yeah. It's not a short. It's not. It's really, you have to invest for longer outcomes. So we need to teach, to inform our governments that it's not wasted money. If you invested in research and development at Uganda Virus Research Institute and I don't give you a vaccine tomorrow, that's not wasted money. We build on that in order to have the end product in the end. So there's no way out. We can't expect that we're going to use other people's antigens, designed vaccines alone. We need also to produce ours, because as we're talking about, we are talking about pathogen economy. And if it's pathogen economy, we need in the end, if possible, really benefit from it economically. And we need to own. And ownership comes from the bench. What other people do, that also works if you have the facilities. Some start from the bench. If you don't have all the pipeline that will lead you to the product, you sell your innovation to somebody else. We can also encourage our scientists to do the beginning R&D. If we don't have GMP and there's challenges with that, we can sell our innovation and bring in money so that we can invest in science for the future. So the emphasis is whatever innovation, if we want to benefit from development, making products, we start from the bench.
Thanks a lot, Professor Ponchano Kalebu, for that. Can you just have the mic back? I'm going to be opening up the floor for you to say a word or two or to ask your questions to the experts. We have the big boys and girls in the room. Just give this to Dr. Adrian. Dr. Adrian, you've just heard it. I just wanted to give you another opportunity as a manufacturer or someone in the pharmaceutical industry to speak about how can we tickle you to invest heavily in this value chain. Dr. Adrian.
Okay, gentlemen, sorry, earlier I was very brief, but I need to elaborate more on the reality of how manufacturers can realize vaccine manufacturing, even in Uganda here. For your information, it is already taking place. We have one factory which is going to make human vaccines underway, and we already have a veterinary factory which is making vaccines for Newcastle disease. That is at least some progress. Then looking at the bigger picture, we need to factor in 4 sections. That is the input from government, input from investors, input from the human resource, and the funding. So when you look at the funding, it's so unlucky that we didn't bring somebody from the banking sector here, but these are people who are crucial for such a meeting because they steer the capitalization of the investors in the private sector. So setting up, for example, a facility for vaccine manufacturing can require you to invest anywhere between $50 million to $700 million. So when it comes to R&D development, which Professor Ponciano has been talking about, you may go anywhere between $50 million in up to phase 2, that is around $300 million of investment. Then when it comes to licensing the vaccine itself, you may need to invest probably a net of around $2.5 billion. So all this amount of money I'm talking about, for example, here in Uganda, no single bank can fund it. So we need a consortium or collaboration with bankers to support investors who are already willing to risk, and who are already willing to risk into this sector of vaccine development. So that's why I wanted to point about the bankers. Regarding the human resource, we already have capacity in the country, at least for the development of some vaccines. There are some vaccines which require somebody to have practiced culturing of the virus for maybe 15 to 20 years. Those require some long duration of GMP training. We can achieve that over time. Then one of the things that lets us down as investors would be the policy initiatives by government. Is the government politically willing and ready to implement initiatives that support the vaccine manufacturing sector? As one of the colleagues has mentioned here, is that for you to produce a vaccine to target the real market you want, you need to have your costs targeted below 5 cents a dollar a vial. Normally, when you look at the way we are having costs of production in Africa, it is a bit extremely hard for you to produce a vaccine below 15 cents a dollar of a vial. It's extremely hard. So we need pooled procurement, and that's where the African Medicines Agencies comes in, whereby it is going to harmonize regulation in order to eliminate the factoring in of different regulation fees per each country, easing the process of vaccine registration and harmonizing a market. So I'm happy for that initiative. It has a good focus in some areas, but it also has a bad focus in other areas, which I'm going to elaborate on just shortly. So when we harmonize markets, remember we also have industries in this sector which are many but need to be supported to be functional. For example, in the ESC, we are doing the ESC harmonization of products and registration. So if somebody is from India, he registers a product for all over ESC, it is going to kind of cut off the market share for local companies that are already utilizing that market. So what I'm trying to point at is harmonization usually benefits multinationals and the big corporations who have already systems in place to utilize it, who have dossiers arranged, of which such capacity has not yet been built in some local companies. So when it is made freely open, it disrupts the whole market, the whole functionality of local industries. So it has to be categorized to specific medicines that are not produced locally, or which given regulatory bodies cannot regulate. Like, for example, vaccines. So we can do harmonization of markets and the harmonization of markets for vaccines, for anti-cancers, for some rare antibiotics, which are also a bit hard to test. So that is more precise. But if we say we harmonize, for example, Panadol market, it means a person like KPI and the Reni who are making Panadol here in Uganda are going to be totally cut off. So we need to limit what we put in the market pool under harmonization program. Then another concern I wanted to state about regards our regulatory authorities. In vaccine development, for you to pre-qualify a vaccine to the market, your regulatory authority, which is a sponsor, has to have a status which authorizes it to be ready for vaccine assessment. So when you look at Africa, we do not have a vaccine regulatory authority which is already on the pre-qualified level for assessment of a vaccine. So it means if at all I set up an investment here in vaccines and my regulatory body cannot I cannot assess it for pre-qualification of market, I'm going to have to pay to another body outside Africa. And for example, if you go to the WHO, that may cost you somewhere between $200,000 and $50,000. That's too much capital for an individual company to invest. So it kind of shows you that the way to develop a vaccine, much as investors are ready to invest in this area, there has to be a tandem of collaboration between bankers, the human resource we are building at universities, the willingness of investors and the ideologies they have, as well as the government policies, regulatory, to cut the costs. Then one other factor which is the most critical that I'm going to lastly talk about is what Professor Ponciano talked about, and I'm in very clear support of that. When we call on multinationals to make partnerships with us here, remember they've invested in R&D. They're not going to give us total intellectual property rights to utilize in our country. So in some of the instances, that's why you will be refused to do drug substance manufacturing here on the ground and only limited to fill and finish. It is not sustainable for us as a country who want to do vaccine manufacturing to ensure reliability of access for our people. It cannot be sustainable. And even if you push them no matter what to set up factories here, they would rather do away with our investment. If for example, a company like Merck is selling $30 million of vaccines in Uganda and you are pushing it to set up a plant here, it will say, let me do away with that $30 million. I will send my product elsewhere in China where I can get 20 or 200 or $300 million. So the way to go as Africa, because we don't own rights to these products, we don't have a say. Whoever owns the rights, who invested in research, has a say where their products should be made, what it should be utilized for. So going forward as Africa, we need to get on the front page of research and fund research in industries, then and fund research in laboratories like UVRI, and also fund manufacturers to conceptualize that research to GMP manufacturing, because you may invest in research. On average, you can have around 30,000 entities which are under development in a lab, and only 5 make it for clinical trial. And out of those 5, only 1 product makes it through as a drug. So it takes a long while. So we need to work in tandem regarding that. So that's what I wanted to elaborate.
Interesting views. Instead of just doing finish, instead of just doing fill and finish. There's been conversation, Professor Ponchano and the rest of the team, about the aspect of technology transfer, which has really been received with mixed reactions. But it's, Dennis, you want to say something shortly? Then I can open it up for you to make a contribution or two.
Yeah, I wanted to correct the recent. We are not going to debate. It's the latest information. Harmonization is a very good initiative for all of us. Now, let me give an example for Uganda. How do we protect our local manufacturers? Somewhere here, we have set up a policy of buy Uganda, build Uganda. So those multinationals or any other product that is registered within Uganda, it will be stretched to the region. We are protecting, there must be protectism. We are protecting our industries now. The locally manufactured molecules are given preference. So if one is to, for example, the previous speaker gave an example of paracetamol or Panadol. Let me stick to that. If the local manufacturer produces paracetamol, it is bought locally by the local stores at 0% or at 1%. The other imported local products of paracetamol, they pay 12% of the value for it to come in here. So we protect the local manufacturers using this harmonization initiative. So this policy, again, we go back to government policies. These policies help the development of industries, including vaccines, in the country and in Africa, if we develop good vaccines. It's just like agricultural products. You cannot export your agricultural products to the US or to Europe unless you satisfy certain standards. They protect their farmers. So governments must have policies that protect our local industries, including manufacturing of vaccines, to make sure that we sustain ourselves. When we go back to COVID, because it's one of the topics that we are discussing now, who were the big investors, Bill and Melinda Gates and other private sectors? We need to attract the private sector to get interested in production of medicines, not the government. If we rely on government too much, government can set up policies, but we cannot rely on government to invest too much in production. So the private sector must drive production of medicine and other, even research, as you have seen in the West.
All right, thanks. I partly agree with you. I agree with you in part. It also requires commitment from government. I know, for example, that the US heavily invests in research. The EU heavily invests in R&D. Yes, there is a collaboration between the private sector, but there is a huge investment from government agencies. And I think that's the reason why the farmer grid push has been coming through, that if governments invest in this part of the production value chain, then why should they overly price this and not reduce it? Professor, you want to start? Let's give Prof another opportunity. Someone help, please. Thanks. Just to remind you, it's your time to talk back. It's your time to have a say. If you want to say something, you just raise your hand. I'll give you an opportunity to say something, and then we'll close this up. Prof, you're very welcome.
The Panadol story just made me just make one comment. There are two products we're talking about. Panadol is easy because the patent issues, it's now a free drug. Anybody can go formulate your Panadol because it has been there for a very long time. It's no longer protected. And the costs for making that Panadol now, I think, are much, much reduced. And the Uganda market could be good enough for that. So that is very good also. To be ready also for us, our manufacturers, and to invest in producing those goods or those products where there is no more intellectual property, patents, and the rest. The costs come down. The biggest challenge comes to earlier on, making those new products. If you want to go there, what a colleague there said, very, very, very expensive. And there, if you are targeting local market, you'll never make it. That's why we need organizations like ARIPO. I don't know whether we talked about ARIPO. That's why we need issues like the TRIPS agreement to be looked at. You are looking at bigger markets. If you want to come to a new product that still has, where you have invested millions and millions, you are looking at markets beyond Uganda, beyond East Africa, beyond the region, best global, which is very challenging now. We are faced, this is one of the issues we are faced with. When we say we are going to develop new products. Where are you going to sell it? Yeah, the Europeans, the Americans, they have protected themselves. Yeah, keeping just a patent, intellectual property, is very expensive. You pay heavily annually. You're looking. So those are the issues that we face. When we come to issues like Panada and the rest, it's a little bit easier. There could be also other vaccines whereby they are now free. You can manufacture them. The people who developed them already made their money. They don't mind. So that is a little bit easier. So we are faced with those challenges. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Pontiano Kalebu. It's your time to talk back. You have a question to my panelists or contribution. I'm happy to give you a minute or two. Can you help me give that to him? Contributions, comments, views. Is that a hand, ma'am? Contributions, comments, reactions. Contributions, comments, reactions, questions. Okay. Let me go back to my panelists then to give their closing remarks. And then, we will leave the stage. Let me start with Dr. Adrian Dung.
I thank Ahaki for organizing this conference. And my the message I can give for everyone to go with is, every dream, like I said, can be realized. Even vaccine production in Africa can be realized, and each of us has a role to play. The public in awareness, the CROs in advocacy, the local manufacturers in inventory and building the building blocks of vaccine chain production, the funders in giving funds that are easily accessible without too many strings attached. So when we combine all these things together, we can realize this and promote the public health, and we promote the health of the people in our country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adrian. Yes, Jen.
Thank you so much. What I want to say really is that vaccines, like the medical products, it's really, really big business. And if we are to be part of this big business as Africa, we need to up our game. In all these issues we have raised, the issues Professor Ponciano has raised in research and development, but I also think the role of the state is really, really important. You have told us what is required to invest, in the entire, from the bench to that, to the end product. That's a lot of money, and I think the role of the state is important. And I ask you to read a book, The Entrepreneur State. It shows how the US government invests in its businesses. So we shouldn't shy away to say it's a private sector. We don't have such private sectors to be able to do that. Lastly, we need coherence in our policies. The health policies, the investment, the trade policies, competition policy, procurement policy, all of these policies, intellectual property policies, have to pull in the same direction. But the way I see it, all the policies are going to different direction. And we haven't put in a lot of effort when it comes, for example, in the WTO negotiations on the TRIPS waiver. I haven't seen a lot of people from the health, I see people from trade negotiating in Geneva, not the health aspect. So we need to move together. We need to pull our resources together. We need to pull our human resource and all these things together. Lastly, Dennis, you have raised the issue of protecting local industries. It's very, very important, but it's the how. How do we do it? I usually see us negotiating agreements with the EU, with the US, to just open up. Yet when we sit here, we say, let us protect our local industries. So walking that talk in all the things we do is very important. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. You remind me of a deal that was supposed to be concluded in Serbia to take our coffee on the ideology that they will reduce about 28% of the taxes. And the government refused, and they said they want to come and set up here and put made in Uganda, but they take the coffee elsewhere, and they have a right to export everywhere they want to. Interesting. Thanks. Yes, Ziada.
Yes, so in conclusion, we need to define our end goal. We have so many antigens to look at. What are our specific antigens of focus? What are the key parameters outside safety and efficacy that we want to meet once these antigens are on the market? Once we have defined that goal, then we begin to work backwards to really help us now focus on what are the key investments that need to be done, whether it's in terms of policy reforms, what's the contextual details of these reforms that we need to look into. So for me, my conclusion is we need to work with the end in mind and start moving backwards.
Thanks, Ziada. Thank you very much. Seru, Dr. Seru.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank Haki for putting this together. For me, if we are to realize this undertaking, including producing 60% of the vaccine required in the continent, we need to mobilize funds from within. And the funds are there in this continent. And reduce dependence on the global north. Then could be another thing. Someone talked about political will. The political will is there. The only thing, we don't have the muscle and the strength to actualize it. Thank you so much.
That is quite interesting. The political will is there, but we don't have the muscle to actualize it. You know what? Just that something just dropped in my mind. But I'll do that when I'm giving my closing remarks. But thanks a lot. Yes, Dennis. Dr. Dennis Mwesigwa.
Thank you again, the organizers. But I needed to ask, this wonderful discussion we've had here, is it ending here? I have seen only a gentleman from National Planning, and a lot has been said, and it contributes towards improvement. And for us as an authority also, we've been working very hard with the Ministry of Finance, Planning, to try to help the local industries. But somehow we don't get our ear, they don't listen to us sometimes. So your story here, where does it go? I would like you to take it to those who have ears to listen, especially what we have discussed. It's very, very important not to end up here and we stop at that. The gentleman has talked about policies in the national plan, something like that. But it ends on shelves somewhere, gathers dust, and we don't get to know. It ends there, then a new one is formulated, and so where do we go from here? So that's my question. I hope you can answer it as you conclude your story again. So thank you once again. I would say the 60% can be achieved, but it's not a split. It's going to be a marathon.
Wow. Marathon, I agree. Where do we go from here? I think we have you, and you're in power. You are in government. So the first thing is actually, how do you mobilize? How can we work together so that you mobilize a consortium where we present a paper and people watch this? You know, you have the right to invite the Speaker of Parliament or people the Health Committee, the Minister of Health, and and all these people, and we have really similar conversations, but this time with commitment. I think that's the first thing, and I want to buy you coffee so that we can start really getting on this. Where do we go? I mean, Morris here sees the minister every single day. You could just say, Honorable Minister, I want us to meet and really look at these commitments. Morris, you really talked about the issue of, of we need to put a muscle to it, and that this. Look, let me just break it down for you guys. If there is commitment, political will, and commitment to invest, Professor Pontiano, what is your budget annually in research, roughly? Just, I wanted to come to something as the Uganda Virus Research. Okay, let me, maybe it's classified, but I wanted to speak that this country has a speaker and a deputy speaker who ride cars of 2.6 billion, 2 cars. 2.6 billion. That is 1.3 billion shillings every car. This country has leaders, including the Vice President, former Vice President Edward Chwanuka Sekandi, who drives a car as a presidential advisor. He has a car of a former Vice President. He has literally 4 cars to his disposal. This country has, how money really slips through, We have ghost health centers in Intungamo, that have been operating for the last 10 years. We know all these things. So, do we have the money to really say, Professor Pontiano, I am giving you 1 trillion shillings to pump into research and development. Grow your professors, be in the lab, be on standby when Ebola breaks up. And thank you, by the way, for always, if there's any outbreak, everything we hear is the tests have been sent to the Uganda Virus Research Institute. What do you think guys have been doing there? They've been interacting with viruses, guys. I've had an opportunity of going there. These are serious viruses that are frozen, and a lot of investment goes into this. So for me, I think it is our role to hold our leaders accountable. This is life and death. And I'm giving my closing remarks. These are the ones. We are playing around with life and death. When COVID broke up here, I saw how people could not travel. I saw how ministers were queuing. Private facilities were filled. Government facilities, no one could fly out. This is us. This is us. This is our loved ones. These are our children. Watching them die and parking your car and rushing to Mulago, and all the beds are filled and all the ICUs are filled. Having a mother and you're calling, do you have space there? Do you have Banai tumlete in Zambia to Jude? Let's go to IHK to Jude. And we're losing our loved ones. Not even the president could be flown out. He was here. So sometimes I think we play a role, like we joke a lot. We forget very fast. Guys, we've since moved on. COVID, we have moved on now. We have other things to. When a pandemic breaks up, then we'll all rush to Professor Pontiano Kalebu. Can we research on this? But you've not been giving the guy money. We rush to the Adrian Dungus, please manufacture. There is no money. My brother here, Dennis, he says he has the state-of-the-art lab, but what is he going to test when the manufacturers are actually not manufacturing? So I think we really need to take ourselves very seriously and hold our leaders accountable. Like, we need to really stop playing around. I think we play a role. We're now discussing so many different things, but this is a matter of health. So my view or my takeaway from here, or my call to you who are in this place, you sit in positions of power and influence. Please do something to remind each of us about how important the health sector is. There's a minister who got a problem and was taken to a hospital there, and he says he was going to die. We had to airlift him to actually get him to safety. But how about the people who stay there? And we are forgotten. Dear Ugandans, please, don't forget. Can we give a round of applause to my panelists, please? Thank you very much, Dennis. Seru, thank you. Ziada, thank you. Jen and Adrian, thank you. Let's give them another round of applause. I wanted to say thank you very much for everyone who has come today. Thank you for sparing your evening. I want to now call Chief to come and give us closing remarks, and then he will see us off. You're very, very welcome, Chief. Karibu.
Good evening once again. Solomon, thank you very much for facilitating us and taking us through the documentary. For the panelists, we thank you very much for critiquing and analyzing the documentary, and also to make sure that we internalize what Solomon did. And Solomon, thank you very much, and thank you for always partnering with us. We hope the information that has been in this documentary will be of value, and we will be able to use it in various ways in research and advocacy. For the partners, we promise, as Afya na Haki, we will continue creating such spaces. We know as we move towards 2040 in the race of manufacturing vaccine and realizing the 60% as the PAVAM highlights, we as a Haki, we envision not to move alone, but to bring different players in the same space to make sure that whatever we discuss, the discussions and the inputs will make us realize our journey for 2020 in terms of local vaccine manufacturing. As a Haki, we think with the initiatives that we are bringing and through the AMA program, in which we are partnering with AIJ and Siatini, which is around this room, led by Madam Jane Nalunga. Thank you for the initiatives under the AMA program, and we promise we will keep bringing you together and creating these spaces to make sure that we all achieve what the PAVAM is talking about. And I think I take this honor to close this event, and would like to thank you a lot. Keep supporting us, and we appreciate for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and be with us to make sure that we launch this documentary. As I speak now, the documentary has gone live. This documentary can be accessed through our social medias, Afya na Haki website, Afya na Haki YouTube, Afya na Haki Twitter page, and Afya na Haki Facebook. As we leave here, would like to invite Mr. Yusuf Sembatia, who will close on behalf of the manufacturers. Mr. Yusuf Sembatia, you are welcome to close. Thank you.
Colleagues, good evening. I'm here really to close, but I thought that I should make some 2 or 3 remarks to the audience. To Solomon, Ahaki, and the rest of the team, thank you very much. This is a very good piece of work. In a society or a community that really cares, this would incite a lot of reflection and thinking. So to what Mr. Dennis Mwesigwa from NDA requested, let's find a way of getting this information to maybe the people who matter in this country. My name is Yusuf Chimbo Sembatia. I'm a pharmacist by profession. and also one of the manufacturers in this country for pharmaceuticals. Now, a couple of things. I have worked with multinational pharmaceutical manufacturers, the Pfizers, the Abbotts, the Mercks, and so on. Then I set up a plant in Namave worth about $6.5 million. We've just recently started. Maybe this is something. Sometimes there are Ugandans doing things, but maybe not on the street. Now, for a serious country, what question you ask from the documentary participants, this dream is possible. But for a non-serious country, it will not be possible. I'll give you an example. Rwanda has partnered with BioNTech, who are one of the, the researchers that worked, with Pfizer to come up with a vaccine. And they've created something called a biocontainer. Now, a biocontainer is these normal shipping containers we see that has been remodeled to create a GMP environment that Professor talked about and the colleague from NDA. Because Rwanda says, we want to do this at home, but we don't have the infrastructure. How can we improvise to create an infrastructure within our means and get the product here? That is serious. You're not waiting for an aeroplane, but saying, let me ride on a bus to get there. Okay? Now, somebody sits here, convinces the entire government machinery that we are going to manufacture vaccine here. I mean, like the professors have said here, it's unthinkable. Okay, I mean, there could be media here, and maybe they say, who is this guy? But every scientist in this country sits silently somewhere and says, do these people really know what they're talking about? I'll contextualize this to you. The American government, through CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, invests a hell lot of money. Even in China, in the Wuhan lab, there is American money. In Uganda here, in Professor's Place, you go to Butabika, go anywhere, there is a lot of American money. And they are collecting data and information for so many ages. So for you to see them coming up with this solution just like that, there is a lot they've been doing for many, many, many years. Many years. Last week I had a team of people visiting me from China. There is a university called Tsinghua. It's one of the world's best universities. And they want to start doing work in Africa because they realize maybe the Americans left them many decades ago. And now they want to start collecting information. So they see what are the opportunities available in this space. So if we want to do this, like Dr. Seru said, there is some investment that we must deliberately make. Like the Nigerian professor said in your documentary, we must demonstrate that we as Africans are ready to put in something. If we don't do that, it will still continue to be common talk. Like we are talking about potholes, what, and all that. These are small things. So, we can make all this hula ballo. There is a video clip that Aliko Dangote put out about this CFTA. And he said, look, I'm Dangote. the richest man on the African continent. I have to get a visa to go to an African country where I want to see investment opportunities. So what are we talking about as Africans? Right? Such a small thing that me as an African, I have to struggle to get a visa to go to a country where I'm exploring investment opportunities, not to go and beg. All right? At a small level, Uganda and Kenya are fighting about milk, eggs, is it maize flour, and all these things. And then we say, now we want to come together and do a big thing. You see, if you cannot come together to do a small thing, then how do you start talking about coming together to do a big thing? Because vaccine manufacturing, by all standards, is much bigger than selling milk or eggs to Kenya. All right? So these kinds of conversations, I think, need to happen. Short of that, the meetings are going to continue in Addis Ababa, in Kigali, and all that. The serious countries will do it, and so on. The unserious ones will continue to stay behind. Now, I want to say, majority of the people in this room are really, I would say, we are young. And like the professor said, we should push the people in these offices to do something about our health sector. We have no other country. And I want to tell you a story because I'm involved in the health sector. All the big people who fall sick in this country, they will go out, get treatment for the first month, second month, third month. In the fifth month, they are at UCI, Mulago. This is the story. This is how it ends. Everyone, that's how it ends. They will all go. A few $100,000 for the first month, they can handle. Second month, they will try. Third, things start to crumble. In the fourth, in the fifth year, sixth, they end up in Mulago. This is the story. So we people, the young people, should come up and say, people, we need to do something. Do everything you can in your small way. That is really the message, if you can't do big things. Now, the last one, Dr. Lule from the Planning Authority. I'm kindly requesting, as a manufacturer of pharmaceuticals in this country, to get an appointment with you. I didn't know that in this country there is it? I saw it's a working group on pharmaceutical manufacturing and all that. Who are you talking to? And I have the authority to ask this question because I served on the board of NDA for 13 years. I just left 2 years ago. And never in any of our board meetings did we hear about the National Planning Authorities actually doing something in pharmaceuticals. Never. So when I heard the kind of plans you have, I was intrigued. I'm like, okay, but where are these ideas coming from? And what is the relevance of these particular things that they are talking about? You see? I can tell you one thing. HIV/AIDS is no longer the biggest problem of this country. Right? So there are a lot of things I think that we need as Ugandans who love our country. And some of us from the backgrounds we come from, we are not able to go abroad. We are going to die here. So we must do something here. I'm requesting, Doctor, to try and get in touch with NDA and call people in the pharmaceutical manufacturing sector so that we have input into that plan that is coming. Because otherwise, if we don't get input, the plan will anyway come and it will be approved. And then we'll be like, we can't do anything about it. So I'm kindly requesting that you give us an opportunity. Now, with these remarks, I want to again thank Solomon and your team. We've watched a lot of your other work. I think you're making a contribution. Somebody may not have told you, but I can tell you, I saw the ambulance in Ntungamo, and I couldn't believe it. I would say Ntungamo is the first district in this country. So, but that goes to the core of why these kinds of things should continue to be told. So, we encourage you to go on to tell these stories. I think maybe at some stage the impact will be felt. Thank you very much, all of you, and may God continue to bless you.
Thank you again, and thank you very much to everyone. I've said it all. I have nothing useful to add. Just to add on my gratitude on what Chris, our Director of Programs at Ahaki, mentioned. We are very grateful to all of you for spending off your time to join us for this conversation. And this is a campaign we are continuing to do with our partners, both here in Uganda and at regional level, and we'll continue inviting you to these spaces until we make a stride and a change beyond the conversations we're having in this room. So we thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to engage you again in other events that we intend to do as the partners on this program. May the Almighty God bless you.